Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. It's Brittany here with another video to help you guys live a happy, healthy, awesome life in a wheelchair. And today I'm going to talk about a rare condition that some of us with spinal cord injuries live with called syringomyelia, or just a syrinx for short. Post-traumatic syringomyelia is something that can develop after you have a spinal cord injury, and it is basically a fluid-filled cyst within your spinal cord. And I wanted to do this video because there's not a ton of great information out there on the internet about what a syrinx is, what causes it, and what the treatments are. And I had to do a fair bit of digging to find some really good answers so that I could go into my latest neurology appointment with some questions about my treatment in the future. I want to take a minute right now to thank so many people who have commented on my videos that I have done updating people about my health with my syrinx, because it is those videos and those comments on those videos that allowed me to start digging and start looking in the right direction for information, updated information about new treatments for syringomyelia. So thank you so much to all of the people that have taken the time to comment or email, just talk about their own experiences with their own syrinxes so that I could look further into my own syrinx. Okay, so this video is basically just an information video for anybody that's newly diagnosed with the syrinx, and I hope that this brings you information all in one spot so that you don't have to dig around the internet like I did. I am going to talk about what causes a syrinx, why people with spinal cord injuries are more likely to get them, how you treat a syrinx or what the latest treatments are, what the prognosis is with a syrinx, and then I'm going to give you all of the resources that I used to make this video in the description of this video, and point you in the right direction so that you can print them out and take them to your appointments if you would like to. So number one question, I guess, that we're going to start with at the beginning of this video is, what the heck is a syrinx? If you've been diagnosed with a syrinx, I guess you want to know what it is. I already mentioned that it is a fluid-filled cyst within your spinal cord. Where does that fluid come from? Well, it comes from outside your spinal cord, and the fluid is your cerebral spinal fluid, which is fluid that basically is insulation for your brain and your spinal cord, and it's supposed to flow in something called your subarachnoid space, which is just a space around your spinal cord and your brain. And when that gets messed up, that space where the fluid is supposed to flow, the fluid can go into your spinal cord. So we're going to talk about how that happens, but basically that's what it is. It's just fluid that comes from outside your spinal cord that's supposed to stay outside your spinal cord that gets inside your spinal cord, and it can build up and cause nerve damage over time. So that's what a syrinx is. Next question is, what causes a syrinx? Before we talk about what causes a syrinx though, let's talk about some parts of your anatomy that make up your brain and your spinal cord and the areas around it so that you understand a little bit better what's going on in the cause of a syrinx. So the first thing that I want to define is the meninges, which are the three layers of membranes that cover your brain and your spinal cord to protect it. The outermost one, called the dura mater, is closest to your skull in your brain and closest to your vertebrae in your spinal cord. It's the outermost layer. The arachnoid mater is the middle layer, or the middle membrane, and then the pia mater is the innermost membrane that's closest to your brain and closest to your spinal cord. And then in between your arachnoid mater and your pia mater is the subarachnoid space, which we already talked about, that holds your cerebral spinal fluid. And your cerebral spinal fluid, again, is just the fluid that is basically like the insulation for your brain and your spinal cord, so that if you bump your head, it's got some sort of cushion. It's not just going to go like straight to bone and straight to the outside of whatever you hit. It's got a layer of cushion that can absorb some of the pressure and vibration from whatever it is that you hit, so you don't damage your brain or your spinal cord. Okay, so now that we know what those things are, let's talk about some of the things that can happen within those pieces of anatomy that can sort of change how it functions. So one of those things is called a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So in that space, the subarachnoid space where your cerebral spinal fluid is flowing, if you have bleeding in there, that's called a subarachnoid hemorrhage. And then arachnoiditis is just damage and inflammation to the arachnoid tissue that's within that subarachnoid space and in your arachnoid mater. And there can be a whole bunch of things that change the way your arachnoid tissue functions when it has arachnoiditis. So some of those ways that it can change the way it functions is collagen deposits, scar tissue, fibrosis, which is thickening or scarring of the tissue, decreased cerebrospinal fluid flow, clumping of nerve roots, impaired blood supply to nerves, nerve atrophy, nerve damage, and tethered nerves. So if you have inflammation in your arachnoid tissue or your subarachnoid space, all of those bad things can happen. And that sort of brings us to what causes a syrinx. So any obstruction of normal cerebrospinal fluid flow can cause a syrinx, or it can make you at risk of a syrinx. Why? Well, because the subarachnoid space where your cerebrospinal fluid is flowing is basically like a hose that runs around your brain and around your spinal cord. And that hose is supposed to be a certain size so that the fluid dynamics in that hose stay constant throughout the whole area around your brain and your spinal cord. And when the fluid has the same space to flow, then the pressure is the same throughout the whole space as well. And if you change any of the the size of the subarachnoid space, or you change any of the arachnoid tissue and it starts to grow scar tissue, or just has any changes in things in your tissue, it can cause changes in how that fluid flows. And that is what they think causes a syrinx, is the changes in your arachnoid tissue that obstructs the flow of your cerebrospinal fluid. And specifically, they think it is the pressure changes within the space that the fluid is flowing in that causes it to be pushed within your spinal cord. So imagine a hose. If you squeeze off a little part of that hose, what happens to the fluid pressure inside? It increases. And once the fluid pressure inside increases, it pushes harder on the outside walls of the hose. And that's what's happening in your subarachnoid space where the cerebrospinal fluid is. If your area of your subarachnoid space gets skinnier, then there's an area of higher pressure. And because your subarachnoid space isn't like a hose that is watertight, the liquid can go through the layers that we talked about, like the dura mater, the pia mater. It can get through there. It doesn't normally because the pressure is low enough that it doesn't sort of penetrate those layers. But if the pressure is high enough, it can seep little bit by little bit into areas where it's not supposed to be, aka your spinal cord. So that is what causes a syrinx, or the latest research, what the latest research is saying about what causes a syrinx. Okay, how common is a syrinx? Well, in this video, we're specifically talking about a post-traumatic syrinx, so something that happens after a spinal cord injury. Estimates range from between 1% and 7% of people with spinal cord injuries will develop symptomatic syringomyelia. So these are people that actually have symptoms and are having some sort of neurological changes that their syrinx is causing. So some people might never have symptoms from their syrinx and not even know they have it, but 1% to 7% of people with spinal cord injuries will go on to develop symptomatic syringomyelia. So why are people with spinal cord injuries more likely to get a syrinx then? Well, remember when we talked about arachnoiditis and arachnoid hemorrhage? Well, when you get a spinal cord injury, all of those things get affected because you have damage to your spinal cord, you have damage to your arachnoid tissue, and obviously you're going to get bleeding, you're going to have subarachnoid hemorrhage in that area where your cerebrospinal fluid is normally supposed to flow. And because you've had damage to your spinal cord and your arachnoid tissue, you likely have arachnoiditis, which is scar tissue and all those other things in the area that your cerebrospinal fluid is normally flowing. So what all of that does is it narrows the area where your spinal fluid is supposed to flow. And because you're narrowing that area and you're changing the fluid dynamics of your cerebrospinal fluid, you are at higher risk of developing a syrinx. Not everybody gets it, and not everybody that has arachnoiditis or damage to their arachnoid tissue or their spinal cord is going to develop this, but because we have some of the precursors to what they think causes a syrinx, we're just at higher risk in general of developing it over time. So what are the symptoms of a syrinx then? Well, there are a lot of them, and they are different depending on what the syrinx is affecting and where the nerves are that your syrinx is affecting. But there's some general symptoms that neurologists look for when they are trying to diagnose a syrinx, and those symptoms are things like pain, nerve pain, aching, burning, stabbing, itching, an ascending sensory level. So if you're paralyzed at, T12 and your sensory level or your function level is moving up, like T8, T9, T6, T1, that's a problem. So they're looking for like what is causing that. Changes in bowel and bladder, numbness, weakness, changes in spasticity, changes in autonomic things like heart rate and blood pressure. So those are some of the classic symptoms. But again, everybody's different because whatever nerves your syrinx is affecting will cause different symptoms. But those are just some general things to look out for. When I was first thinking that I had a syrinx, my symptoms were weakness, and really itchy hands. Like my hands were always like burning and itching. They had like a weird nerve pain in them. And I actually found my syrinx because I was reading a report that I got after my spinal cord injury of all the secondary health complications that people with spinal cord injuries can get after their injuries. And as soon as I read it, I was like, Mom, I think I have this. And as soon as she read it, she was like, I think you have this too. And it allowed us to sort of further investigate, and then we ended up finding my syrinx. But yeah, everybody's symptoms are different, so don't just, take these as gospel. Any weird neurological symptoms that you're having can definitely be caused by a syrinx. So ask your neurologist or your physiatrist about it if you're concerned. The next thing that I want to talk about is how is a syrinx diagnosed? Well, the traditional ways that a syrinx is diagnosed is through an MRI, through nerve conduction studies, and through clinical evaluation by a neurologist. MRIs will show whether you have a syrinx or not, and then these other things will tell the doctor whether you're actually having symptoms from the syrinx or if the symptoms are from other things that might be related, but not caused from your syrinx. So nerve conduction studies are things that your doctor does to sort of rule out other things. So these are basically like zap you with a bunch of electricity, I guess, to see how your nerves respond. And they'll do it peripherally. So when I get my nerve conduction studies, they're checking to see if anything in my peripheral nerves could be causing numbness or weakness in my hands, such as carpal tunnel, tendonitis, anything that might be causing inflamed nerves, ulnar nerve, neuropathy, anything like that might be causing things in your hands or whatever area that your syrinx might be affecting. Your doctor is looking for that. And the nerve conduction studies don't actually confirm a syrinx, they just rule out other things. So if I'm having numbness and weakness in my hands and I get nerve conduction studies and my nerve conduction studies are entirely normal, that means that there is no neuropathy in my peripheral nerves. There has to be something coming from my central nervous system, my spinal cord, my brain. So that's kind of what they use nerve conduction studies for, is not to confirm, just to rule out other things that might be causing your symptoms. And then clinical evaluation by a neurologist, they're going to test your strength. They're going to do pinprick things to see where your level of feeling is, sensation levels are, that kind of stuff. So that's an important part of the picture because it's also going to tell you whether you're losing strength or function. And that is going to help a neurologist know whether they should treat your syrinx or whether they should just sort of wait and see. So those three things are sort of how they paint a picture of what your syrinx is doing, if you in fact have one, and if you need treatment. The next question is, how is a syrinx treated? Well, there's basically two methods. There is the traditional method, which is just removing the fluid from the spinal cord where it's causing damage, and then the newer treatments are actually aimed at trying to restore the cerebral spinal fluid flow so that it stops causing the syrinx. So the traditional ways of removing the fluid from the spinal cord are things like shunts, needle aspiration, which is just sucking the fluid out, cord opening, and myelotomy are less common. I couldn't really figure out or find what myelotomy actually is. It says surgical incision of the spinal cord, so maybe you're actually like cutting into the dura mater and all those like layers that we talked about to just release the pressure. I'm not really sure. I couldn't really find out what exactly that is. If you are watching and you know what that is, then maybe you can put it in the comments. But basically just removing the fluid from the spinal cord where it's causing issues. And then the newer treatments are the ones that are aimed at trying to restore the cerebral spinal fluid flow by fixing any of those narrow areas in your subarachnoid space. So things like laminectomy, which is removing like the backbone of your vertebrae to just relieve the pressure within your spinal cord. The lysis of adhesion, so if there's any parts of your arachnoid tissue that are all stuck together, then they'll go and sort of break those up. Widening of the cerebral spinal fluid flow space via duroplasty. So remember when we talked about dura mater being like the outermost layer of all those membranes, the one closest to your skull or your vertebrae. So they'll open up that and they'll put a stent in, essentially a little patch of artificial dura to expand the space around the spinal cord. So those are the newer treatments and the ones that I guess are supposed to sort of stop the cause of the syrinx instead of actually just trying to treat the symptoms. Okay, so now that we've talked about the treatments, what is really the management? Like, what do you actually have to do when you have a spinal cord injury in order to manage it long term? Well, ongoing neurological examinations are critical. So I have been followed by neurologists and physiatrists for as long as I've had my syrinx. If you have a syrinx and you stop being followed, I guess if your syrinx is extremely stable and it's shown that it's extremely stable, it's not changing after like 5 years or something, and you guys choose not to be followed every year, that's one thing. But even though my syrinx has stayed stable for years and years, I still am followed. I still get MRIs, and sometimes my MRIs when my syrinx was really stable, like for the 13 years that it didn't change at all, my MRIs were less frequent, so they were more every 2 years, every 5 years, or just when I was having symptoms that might sort of point to my syrinx, then I would get an MRI. But definitely be followed by a neurologist, because ongoing neurological examinations are going to be the quickest way to figure out if your syrinx is changing. The next thing that's really important for management of a syrinx is you being very, very diligent about paying attention to your own body. So as a person that has a syrinx, you need to be paying attention to your own neurological function. You need to be paying attention to your own strength. You need to be paying attention to any deficits or changes in your strength or function. Everyday things that you're doing, are they changing? Are they getting harder? Are you losing feeling? Can you still feel that heat or temperature? Are you still feeling pain in this area? All of those things are really important. I am very, very aware of my symptoms in my hands and whether the symptoms are carpal tunnel-like or if they are, more general in nature and can't be pinpointed to carpal tunnel. So for me, my carpal tunnel symptoms are always in these first 3 fingers and some of my ring finger. So I know that if I'm having neurological symptoms in those fingers, it's likely carpal tunnel, and I don't need to run to my neurologist for everything that I'm feeling if it's those fingers. So pay attention to your body. It took me many years because my neurologist kept asking me about my symptoms. Where are you feeling the numbness and all that stuff? And I would be like, I don't know. I think it's in these fingers. But they need to know specifics so that they can properly diagnose and properly monitor where your function levels are. So definitely be cognizant and really diligent about paying attention to your body. So ongoing neurological examinations and then you being really aware of your own symptoms are really important. And then if you have a cervical syrinx, then you need to be monitored for your breathing and pulmonary function. Or breathing is pulmonary function, but you need to be monitored for your pulmonary function because when your syrinx gets high enough, it can start to affect autonomic functions like breathing, heart rate, all those things. So you need to be monitored for those really important functions just to make sure that you're not losing anything in those areas. So that's basically the management of it, just being monitored and being diligent about your own self-monitoring. Okay, last thing is prognosis, and then we'll talk about the resources. Prognosis with a syrinx. Is it good? Is it bad? Can you die from it? what does the prognosis look like? Well, the bad news is that yes, you can die from a syrinx if it goes untreated and it grows fast enough, because if it continues to go unchecked and all of the fluid builds up in your spinal cord and damages the nerves in your spinal cord and your brainstem, you can definitely die. So that's the bad news, and there are definitely people that have died from a syrinx before, or the effects of the syrinx before. But it is very uncommon. It is very uncommon for a syrinx to kill you. It is very common for it to create neurological deficits and for it to make you lose function. But it doesn't often cause you to actually die. So that's the good news. And the really good news is that 90% of people who have a surgical intervention get symptom relief. So their symptoms improve. They might have to have a re-intervention, so they might have to have another surgery, but generally people who are having surgeries are getting relief, or they're getting some sort of result from the surgery that either improves their function or prolongs their life if it's getting high enough that they're having life-threatening sort of symptoms from the syrinx. So yeah, good news is that it's generally slow growing and generally not life-threatening. The last thing that I want to talk about is just the resources that I used to make this video. I used a bunch of resources and sort of compiled them, but the two main ones that I used are a really recent review of Syringomyelia that was done at the National Institute of Health. And it's basically a review of all of the current research. The last time it was updated was August 23, 2023. So that is extremely current. And then I used a study that was done and that was pointed out to me by a subscriber of mine who actually participated in the study. And it was done at the National Institute of Health as well, and it was by a Dr. John Heiss, and he's the one that sort of proposed that pressure changes within your subarachnoid space and narrowing areas of your subarachnoid space were the cause of a syrinx formation. So I used that to basically, these two resources mainly, to get all of the information that I talked about in this video. And then I had some other ones that were research studies that were current as well that helped sort of build the rest of or piece together the rest of the puzzle for me, and just were basically some information that was confirming everything I had already read in these other two pieces of information. I will link to all of this research in the description of this video because I think it's really important for you to go in and read your research yourself. So I will do that. The other thing that I'm going to link to is the Fauci Spinal Cord Institute or something like that. Fauci Institute for Spinal Cord Injuries. This was another thing that was pointed out to me by a subscriber of mine who was treated there. And I really like this, clinic or this hospital, this institute, because it basically describes the treatment that this Dr. Fauci uses, and it's in line with all of this current research that I described in this video, which is really good. There are other places that obviously treat syringomyelia. I live in Canada and got treated well here, so this is definitely not the only place that you can get treated, but it seems like they are very current in their treatment. So if you are not happy with your treatment, it is a place that you can go to for a second opinion, and I wanted to include it for that reason. So that's the end of this video. I hope it was really helpful. I hope that the resources I've compiled make it easier for you to learn about what a syrinx is and be able to take some questions and concerns to your neurologist, and just be able to help sort of build a collaborative approach to your treatment, because I know that when I was first diagnosed with the syrinx, I was pretty young, so not really collaborating with, what I'm going to do for my treatment. But I definitely just went along with whatever the doctor said. I didn't do any of my own research, and I think that there is definitely better information out there now about what a syrinx is, what causes it, so that you can make your own decision about what types of treatment would be sort of that you'd be comfortable with. So if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about in this video, please put them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. If you're watching this video and you have a Syrinx, it would be awesome if you could put in the comments what your treatment was, where you were treated, what the result of your treatments were, because I think it is really important for people to share their experiences so that other people can learn from them. I wouldn't be making this video if other people hadn't taken the time to comment and email with their own treatments and with their own information about their Syrinxes. And I think that that's the best way to learn, and the best way to get more information is actually to talk to people that have been in your shoes. So if you are someone with a Syrinx, please take the time to just put your own experiences in the comments, because I think that is going to be a really good resource for anybody that comes here that's looking for information, just sort of a one-stop shop with a bunch of information, especially personal stories of other people with Syrinxes. So that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you back here on another video. Bye!